Okay, Drivers Mate podcast continued, right? I was interrupted when talking about anime. So I got off track. I got to Ghost in the Shell and how the filmmaking techniques were transferred from Hollywood style filmmaking into anime, right? And then you saw the techniques of drawing and how they elevated that art get then re-transferred back into Hollywood through films like The Matrix, right? A lot of these cult classic animes and cartoons, cyberpunk, steampunk, these kinds of genres, these kinds of ways of drawing and designing sets moved into the real world, right? Because the real world's set design is based a lot of the time on cartoon storyboarding, right? People that draw comic book panels, right? So for instance, that cyberpunk, like futuristic tech stuff, yeah, a lot of that comes from manga cartoons. Like if you see the sets in Aliens, right, 80s, talking Ripley Aliens, right, if you see how the sets look, a lot of that stuff comes from drawings, right? It comes from cartoon comic book drawings. And a lot of the filming techniques, the idea of the slow-mo bullet cameras and all that stuff, it emerged through anime and manga, right? That is how it was done, and it was transferred over to Hollywood, right? So my era saw that transition of anime going from 2D storytelling to very elaborate shots, right? 3D rendering of cartoons and actually being able to see different angles, right? But it was still men and women drawing, right? And then scanning it into the computer and updating it, right? Because the technology wasn't there like how Pixar Studios had the technology, right? It wasn't like that yet. It was still a lot of hand-drawn techniques, right? And it was good. It was really good. But when let's say when the Japanese culture or some animation studios got hold of the better technology, in the early 2000s, I believe it was, we got something to the I don't know if it was Japanese production or American production, but we got something to the effect of the first Final Fantasy animated film, right? Now, if you go back and look at that first animated film, however many years ago that was, that 3D rendering, that animation style is potent. At the time when we saw it, of course, you know, like when you have game graphics, you're like, wow, this is so realistic. 20 years later, you're like, wow, that was so pixelated, right? But the time when it came out, it looked realistic, and a lot of people were watching it on bootleg. So of course, the shading and the darkness was all wrong, right? It was filmed in a cinema, so you couldn't tell if they were real people or if they weren't, right? That is how good it was for that time. Now, that technology, right, of that first Final Fantasy film, can't remember which one it is. It's not the Final Fantasy to do with the guy with the big sword, right? It's not that one. It's like the corpo Final Fantasy stuff. But anyway, tangent, right? That same technology is what changed gameplay as well, right? So PlayStation 2 and up, those cutscenes that used to be really poorly rendered, like polygons, right? And octagons, or whatever they call the thing, is polygons, right? Where they're different, they're like all these shapes make up a character so it looks 3D, right? That was basically what Nintendo 64 was based on, polygons. But PlayStation 2 going forward, that animation style from the Final Fantasy first film is what gave rise to these highly rendered quality cutscenes, right? And then they got cutscene type games, so it's just cutscenes and you interact with the cutscenes, right? That is a lot of how gaming is now. It's just